welcome into the Target Smart Podcast. I'm back. I'm Anthony Sanfilippo, along with your friendly regular host, Albert Morales. Albert, good to see you again, my friend.
Good to see you, Anthony, and welcome back. I know there are at least a few of our listeners that want to hear all about your wedding and how that went, but I will defer to you. And
no, totally fine. Totally fine. I'm happy to share. Yes, I got married back on the 21st of September. It was a beautiful wedding at a great venue in southern New Jersey. I don't live in New Jersey. I live in just outside of Philadelphia, but it's just across the bridge. We had 140 some people in attendance, and it was all in one place. And I knew, Albert, I knew it was going to be a great event. The ceremony was nice. It was quick. It was a half hour. But we came into the reception. We sat down. We had one of those sweetheart tables, just for the two of us, not for the entire bridal party, just the two of us.
Yeah.
And the DJ started playing some Italian music, right? Big two Italian families kind of getting together, started playing some Italian music. And we're sitting there, and both sides of the room are singing out loud. They haven't served one thing yet. And both sides of the room were singing out loud. And I said to myself, and these people are people who don't even know each other. And I said, you know what? This is going to be a great night. These people are here to have a good time. They're singing already. And from that point forward, for like 4 hours for the reception. And then we had a little bit of an after party right there in the hotel lobby at the lobby bar after that. Everybody had a wonderful time. And so it was as good of a wedding as I could have asked for.
Well, that's great. Tell me some Dean Martin was played.
Dean Martin was played. Yeah, there was some Dean. There was some Frank Sinatra was played. You name it, it was played. If you listen to the Mob Hits CD when we were growing up, I don't know if you ever remember the Mob Hits, like all the songs that were in Goodfellas, right? The movie Goodfellas, all that music, all those songs were sung, and everybody was having a good old time. So it was great.
When I was getting my start here in Washington, I had the good fortune and still really close friend of mine, Peter Carey. His father, obviously they were Italian. He's since passed, but they would when I couldn't afford to go home for the holidays, I always had a home there at Peter's house, and his dad would make the best Manhattan that you could ever think of. And maybe it was because it was from Mr. Carey, but one of my favorite occasions was always, listening to his playlist, and he had it all. He had Sinatra, he had Dean Martin, he loved Benny Goodman too. Just really good swing music that you don't.
Louis Prima,
Louis
Prima,
yeah, and it was great. It was great. I look forward to it every year, and then you start establishing yourself. You don't get to see them as often, but those are memories that no one can erase, and I can only imagine how beautiful that was. Speaking of,
and one more thing on that. One more thing on it. Like I was sitting there at one point, and there were two bars in the reception room, in two different corners of the room, and the one bar had a line of 30 people constantly all night, and the other bar maybe one or two people. And I was trying to figure out why the one bar was having so many more people in line than the other. And at one point, my oldest son comes walking back from the bar, and I grabbed him and I said, Anthony, why is that line so long? He goes, Dad, the bartender gives a heavy pour. So I thought that was a fun little.
I thought he was going to say you should see the bartender.
No.
On your wedding night.
Yeah, all right, exactly.
No,
so, well, anyway, you're about to say.
No, yeah. Speaking of major events, we just had a big vice presidential debate. And,
yes.
And you know what it's like right now at Target, at our company. People are calling, making last minute orders for data related items to our voter file, and then you've got Tom Bonnier out there tweeting every other. The guy's not sleeping right now, I'm convinced, because he's tweeting, seems like, on all time zones. The latest voter registration trends that we're seeing in various states. A lot of these states aren't even in play for us, but it's fun to watch. It's getting very exciting, and that debate, I don't want to say it was a nothing burger, but I think if the goal was to do no harm, as many were saying leading up to the debate, I think that was mission accomplished. A lot of half truths and bald faced lies, compliments of JD Vance, but we can dissect that later. What do you think of the?
I'll set it up first this way. And first, I want to say this about Tom Bonnier. If I didn't know Tom as well as I know Tom, I would say that, oh, he probably just schedules those tweets and they'd go out whenever they go out. But I know Tom, and he's really into this, and he's probably up at all hours tweeting like a madman the way he is. So I will say that that's certainly Tom, and he's awesome, and he's a great follow on Twitter. If you don't follow Tom on Twitter, you should follow Tom Bonnier on Twitter. As for the debate, Albert, I think that just in general, vice presidential debates don't move the needle, like in general. So when you say it was, it was a nothing burger, okay, just, don't do anything stupid. Well, I don't think that anything stupid happened, right? I felt like it was almost a little bit too much of a, sit around the campfire debate policy kind of thing. It was very old school in that regard. I know some people hated it. Everybody wanted there to be everybody tunes in now because we're of a generation that you want to see people go at each other a little bit more. And this was just kind of like an old fireside chat policy discussion between two people who have differing viewpoints. And I actually thought it was enjoyable to watch in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Like it was just a relief to not have the, oh, here comes the name calling. Oh, here comes the BS. Like, I mean, yeah, there was some BS, of course, but it was much more tempered. And I was like, this is much more of what I want to tune in for when I watch a debate than what we normally get.
Well, I walked away. The first impression I had of Governor Walz was, if you asked me to describe it in one word, it was relatable. He reminded me of, all of I come from a blue collar family. It was my blue collar uncles wearing a suit and not feeling very comfortable in the suit for an hour and a half, because it's just not who they are, right? They're, people who are the average American working every day. And I think there's a reason why they picked Coach Walz. I was listening to another podcast on the way into DC this morning when I listened to Religiously. And they had the chairman of the Wisconsin Democratic Party on, Ben Winkler, and he brought up a really good point. Governor Walz, he's like on Wisconsin television, local television as governor, like daily, as often as he is in Minnesota, because a lot of those channels feed over into Wisconsin, especially rural Wisconsin. So I think they were a lot more strategic with this pick than we give them credit for. A lot of folks are saying, why Minnesota? We got Minnesota in the bag, and why not Pennsylvania? Well, Shapiro would have been a slam dunk. But, Wisconsin is one of those states that we didn't win by very much. And I really do think that having him on the ticket has been a major advantage when you compare it to, liar, liar, pants on fire, JD Vance, who tried to, we'll get into the number of lies that he made during the debate. But I thought it was fantastic. I'm convinced now we should just let the women moderate these debates. I thought Nora O'Donnell did very well. They both did. And my favorite part of the evening was when they muted the mics. And if you're like our daughter was watching part of it, and she was still awake to watch that part, and to see her to be able to have her witness that these two powerful women were able to just shut the boys up by pressing a button. I mean, that had to be gratifying for a lot of women, I think, in this country, and some of us girl dads to show them that, you're the boss tonight. Those guys are competing for the job, but they're the boss for the next 90 minutes, and you have to abide by their rules. So I love that.
I got to say, and I know there's been a lot made of who's hosting these debates anymore, and you heard Trump say when he had his, it was a 3-on-1 on ABC, and now if you go on to any kind of conservative media, they're saying the same thing again this time. And where I felt like with the ABC debate, they had a little bit more of an argument, not a complete one, but a little bit more. I feel like it's a really, really shallow argument this time. I felt that both Nora and Margaret Brennan did a really nice job hosting this debate. They really did. I felt that they were fair to both sides. And when things got a little out of control, they moderated, because that's what their job is to do, right? That's what they're called. They're called moderators for a reason, because that's what their intention is. It's not just to ask the question and then sit back and listen. It's to moderate the event. And I felt that they moderated it when they had to. And when they didn't have to moderate, they let the candidates talk. And I think so we need to put to bed the whole notion of everything's always a bias. There sometimes is a bias. I don't say, I'm not going to sit here and make pretend that there's not sometimes. But in this instance, I felt that they played it as pretty straight down the middle as they could.
Agreed.
They did a great job.
Agreed. I had a question for you on the audience. I mean, you're someone who, for those who don't know, Anthony is a professional sports writer in his own right, and follows hockey and the Phillies. He'll be at, I'm kind of jealous, 2 of the major games this weekend.
Yeah, they're at the NLDS this weekend. Yes,
so that's going to be fun. I can't wait to see what happens with the Mets today. They were so close, but I want them to win because of Amy Chapman, who was on our podcast last week. But the debate didn't have an audience, and that's now the second one in a row where we don't have an audience. And
Third.
Okay.
If you go back, I know everybody wants to forget the Biden one, but there was no audience for that either.
Yes, but if you were the clock man, how much time do you think, on average, the clapping and the booing and whatever steals from the actual debate?
It takes a lot. It definitely takes a lot away. And really, I think this format. And look, I'm not trying to say we should never have debates with an audience again. I think there's a benefit at times to having an audience, but we are in such a time now where it's all so far apart. There's no middle ground with an audience, right?
It's the Roman Colosseum.
Yes, it's the Roman Colosseum, correct. That this is a better format, and you get a lot more. I think you get a lot more accomplished. You get to talk about a lot more issues. And I really felt they did a great job in, hey, would you like, Mr. Governor, would you like to reply to that? Mr. Senator, would you like to, give a minute to talk about that? Like, they did a really nice job letting both sides express what they needed to express. I thought it was an impressive debate from a broadcast perspective. Let alone the content. We're going to get into the content, but from the broadcast perspective and the way it was moderated and the way it was hosted, I think CBS should be proud of what they did.
No, I could not agree more. And what are your thoughts? Do you think that Trump is going to allow J.D. Vance to have the last word?
The thing of it is I think Trump's going to do another debate only because Trump can't avoid himself doing another debate. You know what I'm saying? Like he can't. Like he might want to grandstand about why he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to do it, but he loves the attention. He wants to be heard. He wants to go on there and then wants to complain about it afterwards, like saying like they're all against me, right? Even unless they did it on Fox, obviously, which it's probably not going to be.
I go back and forth though, Anthony. I think that he knows he got his ass handed to him by the vice president. And I don't know that you can prepare enough to avoid that, given, what we saw and whatever rules they have in place, especially with no audience and, cutting off of the mics, whatever. I just don't. I don't think the mic thing benefits him at all because he's not able to talk over the moderators or the vice president.
Yeah, but I think what he can do, and I think that his strategy would be maybe not his team's strategy, but his personal, because he doesn't listen to his advisors. He does whatever the heck he wants to do. But I think his personal strategy would be, I just need to go out there and be myself, and if it means belittling the opponent, belittling the other people, getting all his nicknames in, or whatever the nonsense he wants to do, he's going to do that because he feels like that's what got him elected in 2016, and so he's playing the same game plan again here 8 years later, even if it doesn't ultimately work. He didn't do that the last time. He tried to listen to what his advisors said, and he got his rear end handed to him by Vice President Harris. So I think he wants the opportunity to go out there and go out swinging, and it might be to go down to a baseless tone that he usually has, but he thinks that's what he does, and then that's what he does well in his mind, and I think that's what he's going to want to do, and that's why I think we will have one more debate.
Well, we're supposed to be talking about the debate specifics, Anthony. So why don't we dive into? Obviously, we don't have time to cover the entire 90 minutes of the debate, but there were some, a lot of things. There are a lot of major events happening right now. Obviously, our thoughts and prayers are with the folks throughout the South who are still digging out of this just horrible hurricane. And I caught myself this week, somewhat complaining about too much, having to walk through the mud on my farm and get to point A to point B and just dragging. And I thought to myself, Albert, how selfish can we be at times? There are people right now that are literally probably clinging to some sort of structure, hoping to be found for all we know. And I'm over here complaining about it. So anyway, that said, a lot happening in the Middle East, with Iran lobbing hundreds of missiles into Israel. And that was one of the first questions that came up, if not the first question, because it coincided with the debate, that attack. Anyway, I think I do think the governor sees these things through a different prism, given his executive experience as a governor. JD Vance, of course, he's gonna. It's always predictable what they're going to say about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and in this case, it was obviously Iran. But how do you think that JD Vance performed on that question?
So I think it's a tough topic for them to debate. Again, we knew, like you said, we knew where Vance was going to be coming in. And I think Governor Walz has a more interesting place that he has to come from. And the more interesting place he has to come from is that the U.S. government, including the current President, Vice President Harris, and our current administration, supports Israel's right to defend itself against foreign actors, but at the same time wants there to be peace over there. And yet within the Democratic Party, you have a kind of a little bit of a split as to, should we support Israel or should we support Gaza? Should we support whatever's going on in the people in Lebanon who are suffering now? So I think that there's this, you have to walk a finer line if you're Governor Walz, whereas Senator Vance has the ability to be a little bit more
loosey-goosey.
Yeah, because he can be, because it's not his administration that's dealing with this issue right now. So yeah. I think that's what made it kind of an interesting dynamic between the two and how they presented their responses to those questions.
Yeah, and this is where I was sort of, I don't want to say I was surprised to see, but there was not a lot of difference of opinion. Both sides stated that they support, Israel has a right to defend itself, and we've kind of moved on. But that mood, or that sort of friendly tone sort of set the stage for, the next 90 minutes. And then we got
Well, I
into
think, and the one other thing on this, Albert, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I think if when we're talking about what Governor Walz, his whole night, how it went, and when everybody says, well, it started off a little bit sluggish, a little bit uncomfortable, but he got better and found his footing, and he was much better as the night went on. I think it was because of the topic of conversation, right? I mean, I think that this is one where you have to tread lightly as the Democratic nominee, whereas the other issues that they discussed that we're going to get into, you can have a little bit more of a hard and fast stance on and not really get yourself in trouble with your own voters, right? I mean, I think that that's probably, I think it's fair to say that that's why he took a few minutes to kind of get comfortable and get going in the right direction. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I don't disagree. But I do think that sort of set the tone. I was really surprised, though. We're used to seeing this sort of environment where Trump is involved, and it's all over the map because he can't control himself. Kind of like having that schoolyard bully everyone's trying to control, and he won't listen to anybody. But moving on, I think the next topic, and we just alluded to a short while ago, is the hurricane coverage. I'm not sure that JD Vance answered the question on climate change, but
No.
It was one of the moderators asked whether they Trump's charges of climate change being a hoax. What their thoughts were on that, I guess, and obviously, that was a layup for Governor Walz, and I think he handled it really well, especially highlighting the fact that we had personnel on the ground, and it would have been a great opportunity to highlight the fact that Republicans want to cut funding for FEMA versus adding to it. And then he had JD Vance, where he just, true to form, just danced around the issue and talked about how we need to be supporting those who are in need right now, not really getting to the question of climate change being a hoax.
And I sat here, and I'm going to be slightly hypocritical here for a second, but I sat here a few minutes ago and I praised the moderation by Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan. I think that there was one spot that they missed a chance to follow up, and it was that. It was right at this moment. Like I really felt like, if anything, I mean, if you read what a lot of the pundits say, or if you read the New York Times or whatever newspaper or media outlet that you want to do as to who won the debate or who lost the debate or how they performed at the debate, almost everybody kind of agreed that JD Vance was good at dancing around everything, right? Like that was the one thing he did well, was that he danced, like he avoided until the end, which we're going to get to, of course, with the election denying, but he kind of was able to weasel his way around answering directly something that would be a negative for him and former President Trump. I wish they would have, because they did follow up a couple other times later on. I wish they would have followed up with him there and try to pin him down to give an answer to that climate change question. And I felt like they let that one slide. I felt that was the only time where there was an opportunity for them to really kind of hone in and get a follow-up answer that didn't basically say, you didn't answer the question. Can you answer the question? And they didn't do it.
Yeah. And, I think this pivots nicely to the next topic they covered, which was green energy jobs and the billions of dollars that are being spent thanks to the Biden administration to create these jobs, or these factories that are being built throughout the country that are going to build the solar panels that we need, and obviously the batteries that are needed for a lot of these EVs. We have a fully electric car, and it's great. It's great for my wife, who commutes to DC most every day. She doesn't have to use gas, and you get like 300 miles to the full charge. But they're not great for road trips. because you have to schedule your stops along the way and hope that there's not a line. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there because there are these people that are doing these jobs right now, right? They are expanding the way we travel. And I don't think that JD Vance did themselves any favors by, beating up on electric vehicles and just going all over the map about how, money that's being wasted on that and how allegedly we're not drilling enough. But I think the governor came with receipts, and he was not wrong to say that we are producing more natural gas than any other country in the world right now. We are the largest oil producer and exporter as well. People don't know that, but that's thank you, Joe Biden. And my family back home in Texas, who works in the oil industry, are grateful, believe it or not, that we are drilling at this pace and creating more cheaper gas, to be blunt, and jobs in the process. So the all-inclusive policy that these Chamber of Commerce type Republicans want to hear Governor Walz preach about that versus the Republican was I thought was it was great. And if you were one of those never Trumper moderate Republicans on the sidelines, I think Governor Walz is speaking your language.
Yeah, and this goes back to there's two things I want to say about this, but just off that last point, this goes back to you saying that he came across as relatable. And one of the things that I felt that he did really well was I felt that he spoke to the American public and not at the American public, if that makes sense, right? Like it's almost as if he was including the viewer in the conversation, even though they can't really speak back, as opposed to saying, we do this, and you just have to accept it. I really felt that it was very engaging in that way. But the one thing I wanted to circle back to, as far as how Vance replied to it, is it's a very, and we find this in all walks of life, where you want to sit there and not have change. You want to stick with what you know. You want things to be the way they've always been, forgetting that they've always been that way, maybe in your lifetime, but maybe a lifetime prior to that, they weren't always that way. And they became the way that you like it because someone else found a way to change things and to get things started going in a new direction. You're not going to have the perfect electric car in 2024. You may have it in 2034, 2044, 2054, whatever year. But in order to get to that point, you have to be here now, right? You have to be somewhere to start it, to get to that perfect electric car. It's never going to be perfect the first time out. Like we all have iPhones. Compare our current iPhone to the original iPhone. That original iPhone today would be terrible. But the current iPhone is significantly better. And the reason is because you have to take baby steps along the way. And so to sit there and to kind of criticize, what you have in place right now, that's just the very beginnings of this, new version of an industrial revolution in a lot of ways. Is asinine to me. Like that's why I think that you were spot on to say, you can't sit there and complain about it. This is just the beginning. Complain about it 10 years from now, but right now is not the time to complain about it.
Yeah. Do you think that person who bought the first Model T envisioned having AC in it?
Exactly. Probably not.
And now they drive themselves, they park themselves. What will they think of next? But moving on, this is where I thought it was going to get exciting when the topic of immigration finally came up. And I think the question was, it was posed to Vance first. And rightfully so, the question was posed, how are you going to achieve these mass deportations? And of course, first thing out of JD's mouth was either the 20 to 25 million illegals that are here, when most experts who follow these numbers will tell you that the number's closer to 10, maybe between 10 and 15. But I thought I was really expecting them to go into the cat and dog conversation, and that just never really came up. And part of that, I think, was because I don't know if it was a silent gentleman's agreement that they weren't going to go too hard on each other. But at this point, I kind of figured, okay, they're going to be a little bit more reserved in their remarks and their attacks. And I don't know if that was. I have to watch it again, Anthony. But I don't know if that was a result of two men up there and being moderated by two women who they recognize were as strong, if not stronger, than they were. So I'll leave that to the sociologists just to figure out. But it just surprised me that they never. I mean, because if there were ever going to be a fisticuff over a topic, I thought immigration was going to be the one, because it's J.D. Vance who continues to spew these lies about how these Haitian immigrants are, eating cats and dogs and geese and whatever. Were you as surprised as I was, though, that they didn't really go at it?
Well, yes, and again, I said this earlier. Like, part of me was pleasantly surprised that they didn't really go at it. Look, there's certainly differences. They certainly still had, even though that there was a lot of agreement, there were still part of the fabric of it was still disagreement between the two sides. And and I felt that was good. And the one thing I will say, and this could have been, I'm going to throw this out there. This is just an opinion that I had, and you tell me if you think I'm way off base. But I think I might be right. Like, you look at Governor Walz, and he's an approachable guy. He's a nice guy. He's relatable, as you said. And I think that Senator Vance is thinking about his future in some ways in this debate. And I think he's looking at it
about being up to 4 years later.
Right. Exactly. And that's so, like,
he was thinking about himself.
He's thinking more about himself. And so he wants to make himself seem relatable and likable, because if they don't get elected this year, there's a good chance he's still going to be the Republican candidate in 2028. There's a good chance of that. I mean, it might not be, but there's a good chance that he is. And so he wants to make
Taylor Greene would like a word, Anthony.
Well, but he wants to make himself likable and relatable. And so if he can, in this one time where he's on the stage with somebody from the opposing party and they're talking about policy, and there seems to be kind of an understanding and an agreement and a willingness to kind of work together and be bipartisan in a lot of ways, then maybe that does him better down the road. It doesn't do anything for him in 2024. I don't think it helped his case at all to be that way, but I think he's thinking more down the road. And if I'm Governor Walz, I think it was smart to just let it be that way. Be like, yeah, okay, no problem. No, I'm not going to push back against that. That's okay. I'll play it safe. It's fine, because we're leading right now. And if you're going to come to agree with things with me, if you're going to sit there and say, and how many times did he say, some of the things that Tim just said there were actually pretty good. Yeah, like, he said that repeatedly. If you're Governor Walz, don't you sit there and go, all right,
yeah,
sure.
Yeah. I like to think of it as the rehabilitation of J.D. Vance. That was like the launch. It's good.
Yeah,
he's a smart guy. He's seeing all the numbers that we're seeing on our side, and it's going to take an inside straight for Trump to pull it off, I think. But he knows that if when they lose, he's going to have to do a lot of work over the next 2 years before Iowa comes around again, and take care, do some fence mending, especially with women. But who knows what the Republican Party will look like then, right? If it's a complete blowout,
right?
The way I dream about it, or at least that it should be, who's to say that the sane wing of the Republican Party doesn't come back. But I don't know. I think Trumpism is here to stay, unfortunately, and unfortunately for America, he has offspring. So we're stuck with them for the foreseeable generations. But I want to stay on the topic of immigration, Anthony, because you bring up your wedding as we kicked off our podcast today. And, I have this, people always ask me, especially here more recently, why Latinos are starting to drift away. And, there's no one single answer about this. I happen to believe that we've always been more or less gettable for both parties, or at least a good chunk. Not half of us, but a good third, 40% on a good night for Republicans, just like George W. Bush did when he won. I've seen midterm cycles where Latino candidates at the top of the ticket. Governor Brian Sandoval comes to mind from Nevada. I like to highlight him because he was one of those that got over 50% of the Latino vote as a Republican to get reelected for governor. Back then, we had a governor in New Mexico that same cycle who also got reelected by 50% of the Latino vote in New Mexico, Susana Martinez. So we vote we vote for our people in some ways. But I think what we're seeing today is that being compounded by the fact that there are more people from my generation and prior generations that are now second, third generation Latinos, and they're not seeing themselves anymore as Hispanics or in this box, right? They see themselves as Americans. Like think of all the Italians that you grew up with who had abbreviated names. Gino, like my dad, versus Genevieve or whatever, right? They assimilated and they no longer identify as strongly with their community. So when, you have a Trump-like figure attacking us, it kind of doesn't stick as much as it would have some cycles ago. And then there's also those, my dad will tell you that when he got here and he was making his start in the construction business, he often at times he received more discrimination from his own people, the Chicanos that you hear about. They didn't like that people like my dad were coming in and taking these jobs, and frankly, in some cases, doing a better job and being promoted quicker than they were. And so there's some of that. There's some hard truths that we don't deal with. But can you maybe share with me what it was, maybe not your own family experiences, but I guess you grew up at a time when I think Italian Americans were no longer being discriminated as
Correct.
much as they were, say, in the 30s or the 40s.
Correct. Yeah, I'll give you a great example of exactly what you were just talking about from my life. When I was a kid growing up, I went to a Catholic grade school. And there were in West Philadelphia, born and raised, just like the Fresh Prince back in the day. We had several Catholic grade schools. Mine was the Italian Catholic grade school. And when I say that, it wasn't just because our neighborhood was all Italians, but in the early 1980s, there was a requirement that at least one parent had to be of Italian descent for the child to go to that school. There was an Irish Catholic school that was several blocks away that had the same requirement that at least one parent had to be of Irish descent to go to that Catholic school. Now, that changed while I was there. It was in the mid-'80s when they took that rule away. But when I try and tell that story to my kids today, and my kids are in their 20s, right? So I try and tell, if I say that to them today, they just laugh at that. Say, that's so ridiculous. But it's like their father, it's only one generation removed. Their father experienced that, where we were all looked at differently. Like we all had to be considered something different. And now it's like, No, like we're all the same. Like what that doesn't make a difference. All that is kind of a heritage thing. It's not really have anything to do. We all grew up in this country. We're all Americans. So to be labeled in that way, it really kind of is like the younger generation. Like, sure, some of us remember it, but the younger generation doesn't want to be labeled that way. It's like we're all the same. And so I think it's a different thing when you talk about immigration today. People who are coming into this country, they don't want to be labeled that way, the way we were labeled and our parents were labeled and our grandparents when they came over on Ellis Island in the 19-teens and 1920s. They don't want to be labeled by their heritage. They want to be in America because they want to be American. So I think it's a different kind of immigrant that comes into the country today than it was even 30, 40 years ago. So like we need to get past that line of thinking. And I think eventually we will, but right now we're kind of in that converse where there's still a split and that makes it harder. But yeah, like, I mean, it's a totally different thing, different culture of people today in the way that they think about being in the United States. So like, it's fascinating to me that this is such a big talking point, because it's like, sure, people want to be here. And yes, there are, look, the border has not been handled well in the past. It's getting better. They're going to keep trying to work at it and fix it. And that needs to be done. But to sit there and say that the people who are coming into this country, we need to get rid of them. That's also asinine. Like I keep using that word, but it's asinine to say you're going to have mass deportation. If there are people who deserve to be deported because they're violent criminals, yes, 100%, get rid of those people. But 90% of the people who are coming in here want to be American. They don't want to be recognized as something else. They want to be recognized as American. That's what this country's about. So it's okay. Like, I don't understand why we keep hammering this issue home. It's so fascinating to me that it's still being talked about like it's the 1950s, 1960s, and not 2024.
Yeah, and that's where JD sort of got away with it by starting with that opening line that first we have to deport the criminals. He put a number on it, I think, like 1 million or whatever. There aren't a million gang members here from Venezuela, but we'll let that one come in. But it was news to me that the vice president was working or moonlighting at the border and allowing all the fentanyl to come in. I had this visual of her
just sitting there going, what do we got there? Fentanyl? Yeah, all right, let it in. Let it come in.
You're good to go.
You're good to go.
That was another thing that, I call it a swing and a miss or whatever, but I think we missed some opportunities to address the fact that Vice President Kamala Harris is the vice president. She's there to support the agenda, or, God forbid something were to happen to the president, she steps in. But JD Vance the entire night is addressing her as if she were the sitting president. Yeah. And nothing could be further from the truth. And I think it was MSNBC. They had this focus group with these college students, and this one young man had the question, and he's like, anyone who paid the least bit of attention in civics class while in high school will tell you that the vice president is there to be the vice president, ready to serve should the need arise, kind of thing. And he was a lot more articulate than I'm being right now, but he had a very good response on national TV, and his following on Twitter exploded as a result. I was really happy for the guy. But yeah, it was news to me that the vice president was working at the border, just allowing all the fentanyl to come in. That was I mean, but
you kind of know that was going to be the tactic that the Republican side was going to take once it was determined that Biden was no longer going to be running, and that Vice President Harris was going to be the name at the top of the ticket. That they were going to then sit there and say, okay, well, we now need to figure out a way to make her seem like it was her administration. Like a lot of times you hear now them say the Harris-Biden administration, right? Like, why is her name going first? He's the president. And so they're really just trying to link her to that, to say, look, it's her fault, it's her fault, it's her fault. I think that the American people in general are smart enough to, to understand that it's not one person who is dealing with a problem at the border. It's not one person who is going to sit there and say, oh, we're allowing all this fentanyl to come into this country. It's not one person. There's a lot more than that, right? There is a person who is president, and they have to take all the criticism, but there are a lot of people underneath that person who are, making policy decisions, including our Congress, our senators, right? I mean, these are the people who are passing laws or not passing them, as was the case with the border legislation that got nixed, right? I mean, there are other people that are involved in this. So I think it's kind of silly to go that way, but it's the low-hanging fruit, lowest common denominator path that they're going to try to use to maybe get a couple of extra votes. I don't think it's a good way to go about it, but they seem to think it is. It'll play out in beginning of November.
Yeah, and we'll end on this topic, Anthony, because I know we're coming close to time here. But I'm glad they address affordable housing. When my parents bought their house, I guess it was the year I was born. They paid $30,000 for their house, and I think the mortgage payment was like, I don't know, $300 a month. Try finding a rental in DC under $3,000 a month. Good luck with that. But it was the first time also that I heard Governor Walz address the issue and get really granular about it. We have, one of the major problems that big cities are experiencing right now is these private equity groups who are coming in and buying residential homes in bulk, and they remodel them and then they lease them. It's not even a rental anymore. They've got these, they take the apartment approach into neighborhoods, and there are tens of thousands of homes now in Atlanta alone. I was reading an article about it recently, where it's these private equity groups that are coming in, and how do you compete with a corporate type when you're bidding on a house? You just can't. The average family can't. They're lucky to have $30,000-$40,000 saved up for the down payment, but they come in with $100K and it's over. But it was the first time I heard that the Harris-Walz administration would specifically be addressing this issue and seeing to it that it is a balanced, that is a fair, that these markets are fair and not being overrun by, these. And it wasn't private equity groups that they said specifically, but I think it was corporate in nature. I forget the term that Governor Walz used, but I was glad to hear that, because I've been wondering for a long time now, when are these politicians going to start talking about the root cause of this problem in these major metropolitan areas, where private equity groups are coming in and just hoarding houses and making it just impossible for a young family of 3 or 4 to compete. So I was really happy to see it finally get addressed.
Yeah, no, I'm glad it's getting addressed too. I think that there needs to be some real conversation as to the best way to go about it. I'm not certain that we've seen any particular policy idea that would, begin to really, really rectify it. I don't think anything that's been put out there yet has made complete sense. But I think the idea that again, this is kind of like we were talking about when we were talking about with the iPhones earlier. Like, you have to have the brainstorm sessions. You have to sit there and say, here's an idea. Let's try this. Okay, that might not work. But let's try this. Well, that might not work. But we'll eventually get to something that does work, right? It's almost like when the light bulb was discovered. It's not like it was Edison discovered it the first experiment, right? He found like 950,000 ways to not make a light bulb, but then he eventually found the right way to do it, and then we had electricity and we had power like that, right? So, like, I think that it's the same concept here. We may not have the right answer right now. There are things we need to try, and I think that it's worth trying. And if it doesn't work, then you try something else, and you keep trying until you find the right answer. But yeah, I mean, the biggest problem that I see is the availability is really, really down on housing, and like, to me, that needs to be addressed first before you even look at the price points. There needs to be more inventory available for people to buy, because that's what's missing in the country right now. So I don't know what the plan is for that. Do we come up with ways to make it easier for housing development? Do we, do you get rid of some of the regulations for developers? Do you put tax breaks in place? Who knows? Whatever the case might be, but there needs to be more availability first. Once you have a little bit more availability, if the price points don't start to come down, then we can start to address it from the financial side of things. Like, how can we make it cheaper and more affordable? But you're not going to be affordable just by throwing money at giving people money and say, all right, now go buy a house, because that's the one thing that's my one. I didn't like from the Democratic side. I didn't like the whole, we're just going to give you $25,000. Well, I don't necessarily think that necessarily works. You might have that money available to you, but now, like you just said, you have these private equity people who can come in and they could go over the top of you, even if you have that $25,000. What good is it, right? So, like, I think that's kind of like, but again, I like the concept of trying to come up with something. But we need to keep trying. We need to keep finding things, because to me, that is a major problem in this country that doesn't get talked about enough. And I am glad that Governor Walz did address it really for the first time.
Well, I think the vice president has been, you two have been talking, because he has been very specific on the thump about building 3 million homes.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's research behind that. That might be the number of houses that we need built in order for us to get back to parity. But let's finish strong by focusing on Governor Walz's strong finish there when it came to January 6th. And Knucklehead over there couldn't bring himself to admit that Trump had lost. I mean, how hard I'm sure he was probably had visuals of Trump putting a gun to his head and saying, hey, you really messed this one up, but he couldn't do it. Yeah. And Governor Walz, I forget exactly the quote that he said. He said, basically, here's your contrast, folks. This guy can't even bring himself to admitting the fact that they lost 4 years ago. And I think Vance said something about, I'm focused on the future. Again,
yeah, he did.
Himself.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I thought that was a very strong ending for Governor Walz. I really did. And usually the end of the debate, for the people who were still watching at that point. But at the end of the debate is usually the strongest, because that's what's leading into your post-debate coverage. That's what's leading into the conversation that's going to be had about the debate. And, you can sit there and try and focus back on other things that were said. And look, we just spent 45 minutes talking about the debate and everything that happened up to that point. But that was the last word, basically. I mean, yes, they each had a final statement, but that was the last time that there was an issue that was being discussed by both parties, and it was a slam dunk in favor of Governor Walz, because, maybe JD Vance wasn't expecting it. Maybe he wasn't expecting that topic to be brought up at the end of the debate, but it was one of those ones where I think they baited him a little bit. Governor Walz baited him a little bit and got him to bite. And JD Vance was good at not biting the rest of the debate, but he bit at the wrong time there. And I think that was definitely political points at that point for Governor Walz.
Yeah, one of the things I'm going to do is go back and look at the ratings, the Nielsen ratings. I know they were high. They weren't as high as the presidential debate or the VP debate between Pence and Harris 4 years ago, but I really want to know is what I really want to know is, did folks stick around for the entirety of the debate? Because they'll tell you who watched or how many people watched the full 90 minutes and how many people sort of cut off after an hour. My sense is that because people liked what they saw, at least the tenor of the debate, maybe more people hung around than we think. and that'll tell us whether or not, more folks saw that closing line by Governor Walz. I'm sure they saw it in the clips, the
Sure.
following day. Speaking of clips, you got to go back and watch the cold opening of SNL Saturday, the night of your wedding. It was actually it was this past Saturday, so maybe you already saw it, but
I did not see it.
Hilarious. It was the guy who used to play George W. Bush or George H. W. Bush. What was it? Dana Carvey. Dana Carvey.
Yeah.
He came back and played President Biden and did a great job. But it was off the charts.
I will definitely have to check that one out. Well, Albert, this has been good. It's been good to catch up. I know it's been a few weeks, but we're back in the swing of things. We got a month to go, or a month and 2 days as the time of recording this, before the election. So we'll have some really good stuff coming up here in the next few weeks. Make sure to subscribe to the Target Smart Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to watch the podcast, you can always subscribe and like us on our YouTube page. Don't also be sure to connect with us on social media. We are at Target Smart on X, Target Smart DC on Facebook and LinkedIn. And if you want to email the show, please do email us at thetargetsmartpodcast@targetsmart.com. So for Albert Morales, I'm Anthony Sanfilippo. We will see you next week here on the Target Smart Podcast.